Okay, so the next step that we're going to go through is going to be getting our actor to emit a particle, or in the case of the pinata, a piñaticle. Uh, so, pretty sure I've got that spelled right. And this particle, or essentially a piece of confetti, we're going to create a new animation for. Now, you should all have got this within that resource folder that you've got. You shouldn't need to divide up the image or apply any masking layers because it's all just one chunk of image there. You might also notice that there's only one colour, but we're going to use code to change the colour of our character. What we're going to do is we're going to place a bunch of these in the scene. I would suggest just doing it with one click and drag rather than spamming your mouse to the point where you have to undo them all manually by hand. And then we're going to go to our events, and we're going to create ourselves a new event. Now this new event is going to be a when created event. This is essentially when an actor is created, it will do something. So for example, it could change color, it could fly in a certain direction, it could do all sorts of stuff. So we're going to do a when created event, and this is going to be when created. We're going to maybe do 3 or 4 different things. Some of them will be quite similar to what we did with the piñata, but what we're going to start with will be motion. So when our piñata is created, we're going to move it in a certain way, and this way we're going to move it is using velocity. The reason we choose to use velocity rather than x speed and y speed in this situation is that it's kind of a lot easier to with things like explosions, being able to create like a radial effect is a lot easier than, for example, trying to figure out the direction based on the x and y speed of which way it's moving. So for this, we're going to use under random numbers and text. So under numbers and text, we're going to grab a random number between 2 figures. Similar to how we did with the piñata, we're going to do a random number between 0 and 360. And we're also going to do one for our speed. Now, we could have just click and dragged that across, but we obviously want these to be different numbers because we don't want any confetti to be standing still, and we don't want any to be flying off at 300, like at a ridiculously high speed. So something like between 0 and 50 should do the job. From here, I'm just going to quickly test it so you can see how that looks. So what you should see is like a shower of confetti coming from the place that we created from the group of them that we created on the level. And then after this, what we'll do is we'll add our kind of something hard to explain it. The thing that we'll add next will be the direction that it flies, the hue of our character. Oh, so you might have seen that let me just do a slow-mo replay almost of that. So you can see there's quite a kickback of lag at the beginning. It runs really slow when it starts, and then when they expand, they send the characters flying off of the level. The reasoning for that is that we haven't disabled the collision for our confetti. If we go to collision, which is on the top tab here, and click and drag over this little yellow box we've got here, we can click and drag and get rid of its collision. We don't need it because it just needs to explode outwards. It doesn't need to hit anything else. We can also go to physics, and this is particularly useful for things like particles. If they don't need to collide with anything, you can disable continuous collisions, and that will improve the performance of your game. Now, before we go any retest it again, what we can do is add a couple more features. You might have noticed that all of your actors were flying horizontally before they collided with things. So what we could do is set the initial direction. So for this, we can use our 0 to 360 code again. So just quickly grab that. So it's going to point our confetti in a certain direction. when it's created. Now you see if these numbers were applied in something like an update event, which changes every second, what would happen is the confetti would change direction and it would change the way it was facing every millisecond. So yeah, it's useful to have that event where it just does it one time. What we're also going to do is we're going to apply a hue-based variation. So we're going to make it that when it's created, it's going to create a random color between a certain range. Notice how all of these three are the same. It's really quite useful to be able to kind of recycle chunks of code, reuse them. You could even use something like a variable to change these, and then you could keep them all the same. So for example, the direction that you were flying out at would be the same that you were pointing in, and you would have almost like a color wheel effect, because colors that were at a similar angle would also have a similar color. So you'd have, it'd almost be like an exploding rainbow color wheel, which would look pretty cool. So the only other thing that I quite like to add is I like to add the scale to these as well, because what that does is it just slightly changes the width and height of them, so they kind of are in various shapes. And I'm going to do that over half a second. So now, if I test this, you should see that they kind of explode out in a much nicer format than they were before. And they shouldn't collide with anything, and there shouldn't be any lag. And once we've done this, we're going to anchor these to the Piñata itself, and then from there I'm just going to run through, like, yeah. Once we've done that, that should be it. Yeah, so that works. Now you might have also noticed very subtly, but you just restart it, some of the chunks of the confetti are getting stuck on the edge of the screen. Now this is alright, but when you are having lots of these piñatas creating lots of these chunks of confetti, they're all going to get stuck on the edge of the screen, and they're all going to cause the game to slow down. The reason being is that when objects exit the level, they're no longer active, and because we haven't told them to die or anything like that, they're just continuing to exist on the edge of the level. So what we can do is we can grab this chunk of code here from the properties, and we can tell the actor to kill itself after leaving the screen, and that should be good for your kind of your piñatical. So now what we need to do is go to our Piñata, and we're gonna create ourselves a new chunk of code, and that's going to be the create chunk. For that, we're going to create the piñatical after half a second. Create our piece of confetti. Now, the reason we put it here rather than here is it'll do when the mouse is clicked on it, then it'll create the particle, which is not what we want. We want it to do it at the moment of its kind of destruction. So the other thing is where we tell it to be created. We're going to do that using its X and Y coordinates. We can find that out under actor and position. It's really useful because it saves you having to type in the numbers themselves. We could also do to make it X center rather than Y, an X and Y center rather than X and Y, because the way usually the way it works with a lot of engines or in programming, it tends to be a certain corner of the image that's the X or the Y coordinate. In Stencyl, it's the top left-hand corner. So if we had all the the confetti coming from the top corner, it'd look kind of weird. So if we set it to the center, that'll make it look like it's exploding from the middle. So yeah, let's just give that a quick test, and you can see how it looks. Oh, we still haven't removed the confetti from the level, but we'll do that in a sec. But you should see now that your piñatas should release, loads of confetti when they explode. It should look great. Now there's one thing that I haven't mentioned, which if this was at a kid's party and this was the piñata, they might be somewhat disappointed. But these are kind of low budget piñata because they only have one piece of confetti that comes out of them. So the reasoning for that is because we've literally, if you look at your code, we've only asked it to do one, one piece of confetti. So one solution would be to, kind of create a bunch of these, which would work, but is kind of a bit of a sloppy method. So what I would suggest instead would be to create what's known as a loop. Now there's a couple of different options, but we're going to use what's known as a definite loop, which is essentially it's going to run for a specific number of times. So, for example, it could run 10 times this section of code. So it'll create the particles a certain number of times. The one thing you want to make sure you don't do is have this piece of code within it, because if you do that, it's essentially going to create the particle, kill the character, and then when it tries to run through the code again, it'll have already killed the character, so then the code won't run. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's kind of like I don't know. It's like asking someone to, if you go on a picnic at the side of a cliff, it's like asking someone to fetch the bottle of water from the car, but then pushing them off the cliff and still expecting them to fetch the bottle of water from the car. It's a bit of a weird example, but that kind of summarizes it up. Yeah. So we're going to create a random number for this, because even though it's like I said that it's obviously got to be a definite number, as long as that's like a range, so there's definite numbers within there, then that should be fine. So I'm going to do a random number between 50 and 60 times, and yeah, like if we quickly test this now, when I click on any of the piñatas, they should create a shower of confetti. And this shower of confetti will disappear when it hits the edge of the screen. Yeah, that pretty much covers the majority of it. If there's, as I said, as usual, if there's anything else that pops up from me thinking afterwards, I'll follow this up with another video. Oh, I need to remove the confetti from the level, but that's easy enough. But there you go. Pow. Yeah, got myself a little celebration for having completed doing the tutorial. Bam, bam, bam. So from this, I could do something like, for example, rather than having it manually reset, so you could make it that your characters could spawn in the level, and they could increase in number over time. I did one earlier this week where, the piñata are getting flung up in the air, kind of Fruit Ninja style, and you've got to hit them as they fly past. Yeah, so there's a bunch of different kind of possibilities of route that you could take this project once you kind of experiment with it a little bit further. But yeah, hopefully that's been useful, and keep an eye out for any kind of videos coming up in the next few days.